All right, so to start, why would you want to know what type of chip you have in your Super Nintendo? Well, the one chip SNES is considered the best version of the original Super Nintendo. It actually creates the best visual picture on screen. So that's why you want to know if you have a one chip or not. I will post some more information about the one chip and all the different variants of the Super Nintendo down in the description below. But to start, without opening up your Super Nintendo, there isn't really much you can do to tell if you have a one chip or not. The North American, which is what I have, the NTSC version of the SNES, one chip consoles start with serial number UN3, but not every UN3 is a one chip. That's something to take into consideration. We'll take a look at that once we dig into this as well. The serial number right here, mine starts with a UN6, not a UN3. So we know that based off the guide, the UN3s are all found to be one chips. It's unlikely that this is going to be based off of that, but we're going to keep going and open this up because we need to clean it anyways. Open up your extension port here, and like so, and check in this little slot right here. If you see 3 dots, it's just 3 little connector points on the motherboard, but you can see it through this hole. It's likely that it's not a one chip if you see the dots, and if you don't see the dots, there's a chance that it is a one chip. I don't know if that's the same for the NTSC models, but the absolute best way to find out if you have a one chip, of course, is to just open it up and find out for yourself. So we're going to do that right now. It's super important that if you're going to open up your Nintendo, you have the right tools. And what you're going to need for the job is a 4.5mm game tool. I have a kit that I bought on Amazon. It was super cheap, nothing fancy at all. There are way better kits than this, but I bought this for like $10 on Amazon. And it just happens to have the exact bit that I need. So what you're going to do is take your console and flip it over. And inside of each of these grooves here, you can see the game tool tip. That's what it looks like there. Unfortunately, Nintendo doesn't like to use standard screws and requires you to use specific tools to get into their consoles. So you are going to need to have something like this to get into your console. And they do this across a bunch of the retro consoles. Start by unscrewing each one of these. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so let's do that and keep going here. Be sure to unscrew them in a counterclockwise fashion, just like this. And to save you the long waiting time, I'm going to speed up the video and we'll jump right to the insides. Come on. All right, so that screw is still being pretty finicky. This is coming off and you want to be very careful and move very slowly here. Gonna push this screw through, spin this around. Hopefully you can take a look. What you're going to see is the controller ports at the front have a ribbon cable, and we're going to want to be very careful here. So here are the controller ports in the front. We want to spin this around. Actually, my lid popped right off pretty easily. So if you're going to do work on the controller ports, you want to be really careful here because of ribbon cables and whatnot. We're just going to put the lid aside. Just power button, the reset, the flap. Of course, it's all plastic. You take a look at it. If you haven't seen this before, pretty basic stuff. We're going to put this aside. But this is what we wanted to get at the entire time. So to find out if this is one chip or not, we're going to actually have to get behind these metal shield plates here. So let's do that step by step. This is the release mechanism for the games. It's just held in with a bar that sits in one side over here and clips in here, and there's a little spring mechanism. So all you want to do is pull this bar out a little bit. The spring mechanism will fall off to the side, and then you can pick it back up. We'll just keep this together and move it over to the side for now. This here is the power switch for the unit, and on the other side is the restart switch. Now, if you're following along in the cleaning guide for this, it's a good idea to check all of your connectors as you go along. There's slight chance, but you might need to clean some of these. Maybe you spilt some soda, heaven forbid, on your console. And so you're going to want to make sure you check all these things. Like if you have a sticky restart button, you're obviously going to have issues with your console black screening because it's going to be constantly restarting. So you're going to want to check that out. The best thing to do to clean your Super Nintendo motherboard and parts, especially the connector here, is to just use some 90+% rubbing alcohol with a toothbrush and give everything a good scrub. I'm going to be showing you how to do that in the cleaning guide as well, so stick around for that. So again, the one chip is underneath this plate right here. So to access this, and this is the front of the console, in the front we can see the controller ports here with the board, ribbon cable to the motherboard. We're going to want to first remove the power switch because it's in the way of a screw that we need to get at, and we're just going to put that aside. Be really careful. You don't want to tear these cables for the power switch that go to the motherboard. So you can just gently put it aside, which is what I'm going to do. This very simply unplugs from the motherboard up here too. So if you're really worried about it, you can just unplug it. Just be really gentle with it, of course. And then we're going to use our screwdriver and get this plate off. So let's do that right now. So there you go, you remove 2 screws. We can just put this aside. Might actually take it out. Let's see here. So you just grab it, give it a little bit of a wiggle. You want to be careful because it is attached to some pins on the motherboard. But just like that, super simple. It comes out, and we can put this aside. This is also a really good time once you start taking your Super Nintendo apart to inspect all of the, the solder points and things like that, the capacitors. It's pretty common as these get older and older, like this is about 30 years old now, especially with capacitors that they start to give out. Now, if you're having other issues with your Super Nintendo where you're black screening, that is a whole nother bag of nuts, of course. It could be a lot of things. It can be CPU, it can be the graphics processing chip on it. And of course, there's not much you can do if you have a bad CPU on your Super Nintendo other than replace the unit or solder a chip on it, which is really difficult to come by nowadays. You're pretty much best to just replace the entire console. But we'll keep going here. We want to get underneath this plate. All these screws are the same, by the way, so you don't have to really worry about them getting mixed up. For the plates here anyways, of course they have the security screws for the outside of the console. Those are separate, they're different types of screws. and that you will need the game tool for. All right, this is just a tin plate, so we can lift this up, take a look at it. Nothing too fancy about it. So we have that front metal plate off, and as you can see, bring this up a little bit closer. I'll try to focus that in for you. So this is not a one-chip console. You know, no loss for me. I love this console. This is my childhood console. But if you are looking for the crispiest of pixels, you're going to want to have a one-chip console. I can go over that near the end of the video, the breakdown of what the different chips are, the different variants inside of the Super Nintendos. If you're looking to pick up a one chip so you know exactly what it is that you want to find, you know, second hands on a Kijiji, a Craigslist, or eBay, what have you. But for now, I'm going to keep tearing this apart, and we're just going to take a closer look at this motherboard. So next up, we're going to slowly remove this ribbon cable. There it is right there, close up. You just want to very slowly give it a little wiggle and pull it out. And again, you want to be super delicate with this because as we can see here, it loops up around and connects to this board in the front. And this is for the controllers, of course, the controller ports. If you damage this, you're not going to be able to use your controllers. So please take your time and just give it a slight wiggle back and forth until it is released. Just like that, you can see it came out pretty easily. I actually wrapped my finger underneath the bottom of it and put my thumb forward, pulled back and just wiggled it back and forth, and that's how I got mine out. So this entire front piece for the controller port, you can easily lift out as well. I'm gonna leave mine in place. I don't really have any need to remove it. I just need this cable detached so that I can get to the motherboard. So let's keep going to the next step here. Next, we're gonna remove the screws to the left and right of the 62 pin connector. Of course, this is the pin connector for your cartridges, your games slide into it, and we want this out of the way. That's going to help us take this motherboard out. So let's keep moving forward. These are Phillips screws on each side of our 62 pin connector, which is in the center. And again, these are different screws than the ones that were holding in the motherboard previously. So that's all you need to do there. Next, along the top, there is another Phillips in this corner that we want to remove, so let's remove that. That one does match the rest of the motherboard screws that we've unscrewed here. Next, we have two more screws, one in here, one hiding on the other side, right in here. It's hard to see, unfortunately. Right in there. All right, now we can gently lift up on the motherboard here. This whole piece should come out. And just like that, this is the back of the motherboard. And just like that, this is the back of the motherboard. You can see the expansion port up here from the bottom. At this point, you'd want to take a close look at all these solder points. We want to inspect the board as best as possible, see if anything seems out of place. There's some interesting information on here, of course, all the traces and everything. We can see that this is the APU 01 version. It's printed again on the back of the board. You can flip your motherboard over to the other side and see what's what. So this is not a one chip. This, you can see that there are two. Let me move this around. You can see that there are two PPU chips on the motherboard right here, PPU1, PPU2. If this were a one chip motherboard, there would just be one big chip right there. So unfortunate that it's not, but I love this Super Nintendo all the same. What else is interesting on here? Here's the CPU right here in the corner. Right beside it is the VRAM. Here's the sound APU. Up in the top left corner, you can see that it's a Sony chip. You know, back in the days of the Sony PlayStation partnership that fell apart, I guess, unfortunately. Yeah, can you imagine having the timeline where we have the Super Nintendo PlayStation, the Super PlayStation, I don't know, the Nintendo PlayStation would have been really cool. Also, just below that sound chip is a Nintendo sRGB chip, which is really interesting. For the RGB signals, I guess. I'm not going to remove this metal shroud, but underneath it you can see a few other things, just capacitors and whatnot. Now, if you were really inclined to take this step further, you would, you know, resolder new caps and all that on your motherboard, which I don't have the tools to do at this point, unfortunately, nor am I able to test everything out to be able to do that. But on the back, you can see this line here. That's the 62 pin connector. You can see number 62. They number it across from left on the top of the board to right. I think that's pretty cool. Pin 1 all the way across to 31, 32, all the way across to 62. It's cool to see these things up close. Yeah, all the PPU stuff is down in this board, down in this corner, down here. I'm going to very gently bring this motherboard back down to where it belongs. And at this point, if you were inclined to clean it, which I'm going to give a quick scrub to different components, especially the 62 pin connector here, this would be a great time to do that. So I'm also going to show you how to do that. So let's grab some rubbing alcohol and a toothbrush, and I'll give this all a quick scrub down and show you how to do it, including the switch connectors and whatnot. So let's do that. So what you want to grab is a toothbrush, of course, because we want to scrub everything down and get into all the parts. And you want some rubbing alcohol. You're going to want to use something over 90%. This is 95%. And that's really important. The higher, the better. Just use a little bit of it. It evaporates really quickly. So it just allows you to get in and break up all the gunk and stuff like that. All right, so now that you have your toothbrush and your rubbing alcohol, you're going to pour a little bit of it into a container here. You don't want to you don't need to drench your toothbrush. You just need a little bit of it. The goal of using the rubbing alcohol is essentially to break up any smut that might be sitting on your connectors, or especially if you spilt, again, I hope you didn't spill cola on your Super Nintendo growing up. I was the type of kid that was super, super anal about anybody using, eating food and using my controllers and stuff like that. So thankfully, I actually have a very clean motherboard on my Super Nintendo. So I don't know how rare this is, but that's my situation. So right before we get into actually cleaning this, I want to make note and also say that since this is an APU variant, let's get it in focus there. Since this is an APU variant of the Super Nintendo, the 62 pin connector here is not removable without desoldering it on the back of the motherboard. So if you're going to do something like that, you could desolder your connector and clean everything down properly. I think some of the older versions, it lifts out or unscrews and you can lift it out and you can clean the actual connectors down on the motherboard itself. The newer versions, the APU was a release right before the one chip. So right before they replaced these PPU chips with the big one chip. And I think all the subsequent versions were kind of like this. So all this is fastened to it. So the best thing that you can do to clean your 62-pin connector is just, again, get the toothbrush out with a little bit of rubbing alcohol and go ham down on everything and make sure that everything's as clean as it can be. Of course, being careful not to nick any of your capacitors and resistors on the motherboard. You don't want to mess anything like that up when you're scrubbing around. So another thing to note is that a lot of people online talk about getting cotton swabs and trying to clean everything with a cotton swab, or getting a credit card and wrapping it in tissue paper or some kind of a cloth or something to get down inside of your 62-pin connector there. Again, all that stuff is kind of pointless when you look at how effective just using a toothbrush with some rubbing alcohol actually is. So really, folks, just get a toothbrush. Make sure it's new and not used. Don't get a used toothbrush. All you want to do is put it in your rubbing alcohol just a little bit and just brush it. Just brush it away. Don't be afraid to use a little bit of elbow grease. We're talking like decades worth of gunk in most cases. So you want to really get in and clean those pins. Most people never do this. As far as I ever got as a child was using one of those cleaning kits, which I might actually have in my bag. I might pull it out to show you just for a second. So this is it right here, and as you can see, it is in the shape of a regular cartridge. This is a Super Famicom cartridge style, and it has isopropyl solution inside of it. And what you would do is you would open this up. I think this just opens up as a flap, if I'm remembering correctly. I don't want to break it. It's been a super long time. Yeah, I might actually have to unscrew this bottom part to open it up. But as you can see in the center here, this is a little board wrapped in a it's not microfiber cloth, it's some kind of an absorbent cloth for the isopropyl alcohol. And what you would do is just punch it in and out. And I might actually use that here a little bit too, but the toothbrush is super effective. I only did this a few times as a kid. Complete cleaning system, it's called. Yeah, pretty interesting little bit of history on that, but I'll put that aside and we'll get back to using the toothbrush. There's no particular method on this. You just really want to be as thorough as possible. I'll bring this up so you can take a little bit of a closer look at the inside of it. The goal is just to get as deep as possible into the connector and get as many of those metal contacts as possible. And again, the point of having the high percentage isopropyl alcohol is that it's going to evaporate really quickly, so it's not going to sit in your system for a long time. I would still recommend, after doing this and you put your console back together, to just leave it for a little while. Like, you definitely don't want to just turn it on right after doing something like this. Scrub down at the base of everything. Use circular motion in doing it. Again, be careful not to mess up any of the resistors or capacitors that are on the board. While you're at it, you can check out, here's the reset switch on the far right side. Test that out. If you've spilt something on your motherboard at some point on your Super Nintendo and this gets sticky, you're going to have some issues with, you know, it's a possibility, however unlikely, that this reset switch is going to trigger black screen on your device. So just make sure that that is not going to cause any issues. You can also bring a brush around all the chips if there's any corrosion. Just give a very gentle brush across all of these with a little bit of isopropyl. As long as you're not too rough, everything will be fine. Goal is just to give it a very gentle wipe down. You could clean different traces on the back. My motherboard is actually really clean, so I'm not going to touch any of this, but it's worth taking a look at on your own board. If you did spill something on your SNES and you're going to remove your 62 pin connector here, you would want to clean up everything, of course, before you resolder, so just keep that in mind. At this point, you've given it a really good scrub down, so we might as well start putting it back together. So we're going to remove the rubbing alcohol from our workstation, and then I'll step us through screwing this back together in the proper order. This is a very straightforward process. We're just going to reverse what we did previously, starting with the back screws back here. Gonna grab your Phillips head screwdriver, something with a bit of a longer neck. I wasn't using my toolkit, my electronics toolkit previously, but it makes it a lot easier to get into areas like this instead of using a big chunky screwdriver. Tweezers obviously also help. It's going to help me guide this screw back down to where it belongs. And of course the goal here is to gently screw this in right until you reach the point of resistance and then stop. You're just getting the motherboard securely fastened back to the shell. You don't want to strip anything. Regular motherboard placement screw, not those long ones. A little bit smaller. It goes up in the top right hand corner. Let's put that in. Next, we want to secure the motherboard further by screwing in these long silver screws back into the left and right of the 62-pin connector. Now we want to go back to our little shield here that we had and put this back in. So to do that, this little hole here can be your guide. This is where the reset switch goes. So we're just going to very gently place it back down like this over top of it. You'll see the screw holes line up. The top of this also has some teeth that will go into your connector plate down at the bottom. So use those things as guides, the screw holes, the reset switch, and you want to lift it up and just push it right back down into the connector like so. Next, we want to screw this back down and secure it. So go back to your pile of screws. You're gonna have a couple shorties, and we're going to screw those back in. Next thing you want to do is take your controller port ribbon cable and get that back in. So just gently stick it down like that and wiggle it in. Like so. All right, this part is a little bit trickier. We're going to reinsert the eject bar. This is the switch, of course, that you push up and down to get your cartridges ejected. You're going to get this spring back into place, which can be a little bit tricky. It sits in here. I'm going to try to make it as visible as possible. First thing you want to do is align the spring into the proper holes. So I'll zoom this up a little bit for you. You can see the spring has little 90-degree turns on it. You want to hook one of those holes down into the bottom like that. And as you can see, the center of it's hard to see because of the zoom function on the camera. I'll try to fix it for you. As you can see, if you align the spring with that hole, the bar is going to be able to go right through the center. Once you get your bar all the way through into this hole, you want to get this part of the spring looped to the front, and that's what's going to give you your spring action back. I'm also going to link a article down in the comments below just so you can see how to do this. Again, it's difficult to do it by yourself. It's much easier with a friend, but it is possible to do by yourself as well. I had to fiddle around with it for a couple minutes, but I got it done. If you took your power switch out like I did, you're going to want to reassemble that. So it actually has some guide hooks, which makes it super simple to install. Little plastic gray hooks, as you can see. This will sit right on top of the hooks. All right, so next we want to put the screws back in for the switch. We've just plugged it back in using the guides to set it down into place. Again, these are a couple of the small ones like previously. All right, now you want to take your shell lid, set it right back in place. Pretty simple to do. You just want to take the guideposts where the screws are supposed to go. You can set it sandbox. You can set it the lid on the bottom, like lunchbox style, as a guide, and just slowly close it using the lips, just like that. The eject button should be right in the middle, which makes it pretty simple. Just press down gently on it. Make sure that your power switch is pushed down. It's going to help you close it. Now, once the lid's on, hold it, squeeze both sides nice and tight, and give it a flip over. Now we want to put our safety screws back in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Again, you want to screw it in just to tighten it gently. You don't want to strip any of the plastic or the screws or anything like that. Once you hit resistance, just let it go. Move on to the next. It's a little difficult to get them in properly, but you can give it a little wiggle. It should pop into that screw hole, and then your tool will grasp it and you can just screw it back in. These ones on the sides are a lot easier to get to because the holes are a lot shallower. You can give it a once over, make sure everything's tight, just don't over tighten it. And that, my friends, is it. You have successfully taken apart your SNES and checked the chips inside to see if it's a 1 chip or not, and given it a good cleaning. The contact pins, anyways, are nice and clean now. So we did learn a few things through this process. We learned that this specific console is not a 1 chip. It is an APU model of Super Nintendo. It came out in 1995. It's actually the last revision before the 1 chips came out, which is pretty cool. So the tip given by Retro RGB to check under the extension port proved to be true, even though it was specifically for the Super Famicom PAL version. We didn't have the 3 dots in this little hole right here, and it was not a 1 chip. So it's good to know that that is also true, or appears to also be true, for the NTSC version of the Super Nintendo. All right, folks, I'll leave it at that for now. Thanks so much for watching. I really hope that this video helped you. If it did, please give it a thumbs up, and hit the subscribe button if you want to see more content like this. I have other Super Nintendos. I have other Nintendo consoles. If you're interested in seeing teardowns like this, let me know. I will make content like that if it's something that you're interested in. If you're interested in helping me make more content like this, you can also become a patron over at patreon.com/JeremyKingTech. Links are on my channel page, as well as down in the description below for my Patreon. If you become a patron of mine, I have numerous tiers, but you also get access to my private Discord server where we can talk about future videos and things like this that I do. If you have any questions about this video or about disassembling your own Super Nintendo, it might be a different version than mine, please let me know in the comments as well. I'd love to talk to you about that stuff. And yeah, thank you again so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.